In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Thank you for that very generous introduction, Mr. Ambassador. It's a pleasure and an honor to see you again. We recall our many conversations very fondly. You've done remarkable service for the development of friendship between our two countries. We're in a unique moment of history. Because the social contract that produced liberal democracy and the welfare state, and the global connectivity that allowed for freedom of movement, freedom of information, relationships that were no longer face-to-face, is under direct threat. Our response so far has been episodic, short-term, and country-focused rather than regional and global focused. Diagnosis is the first part of designing an approach. I don't want to use the overused word strategy, because now putting on lipstick has also acquired the fashion strategy. So I'm being careful with big words. What is it that we face, and why do we need to understand its history before we deal with its current form? First, there's a direct connection in terms of the narrative between Nachayev's Manifesto of a Revolutionary and Osama bin Laden and other advocates of destructive change. Second, terrorism has characterized every known civilization. It was a European phenomenon to begin with. Anarchism started in Russia, spread out through, and brought us the First World War. And it was articulated as such, and of course encompassed America. Second, there are techniques that are common. We have been used to talk about the literature of counterinsurgency, but we have not focused enough about the literature of insurgency and violence. There is a distinctive genealogy of violence from Sorel, again, to today's advocates. Violence is had articulators. Sorel and Fanon connect directly, and they connect with another wave. Thirdly, each of these waves took about 2 decades, some took longer. None of them was a short-term phenomenon. Fourthly, distinctive communities were evolved, embraced themselves, and created the discipline of the professional revolutionary. The word professional revolutionary that we subsequently associate with Lenin actually again has its origins in anarchism. So as such, we need to have this understanding, but with continuity. Fifth, there has been constant innovation. The techniques have changed, they've broadened and deepened. So if we take this, what is it? How will we frame it? The first issue is to understand it as a system. Morally, it's reprehensible. Sociologically, it's a system. And unless you understand it sociologically as a system, you cannot eliminate it and overcome it. What is in this ecosystem? First, the platform is provided by criminality. The global criminal economy is $1.6 trillion. The narcotics production in Afghanistan, my beloved country, is a enabler of this. And unless responsibility for this is understood between producers, processors, traffickers, and consumers, we are not going to be able to tackle the underlying platform. We have to come out of denial regarding narcotics and its linkages with financial capabilities of terrorism. Second, a fundamental lesson from Max Weber that I learned early in sociology of religion was that those who don't work need somebody else to pay for them. And that gives you an enormous understanding. The fifth wave of terrorism is probably the best endowed financial in the whole history of political movements. Movements of national liberation that were the second wave were based on popular support. They had techniques of violence, but they were not dedicated to violence. India being the prime example, of course, of engagement. But each of these on the site is major, and that's why it constitutes the second wave. The financial underpinning of this requires global attention. We cannot deal with terrorism just in terms of the manifestation. We need to understand it in this ecology. Thirdly, there's both competition and cooperation. It's a symbiotic system like the biological kingdom, where there's both cooperation and competition. So Daesh competes and collaborates. Simple classifications that put it one way or others do not bring the issue. In terms of pathology, our interconnected world is given terrorism a distinctive pathology that it previously did not have in this form. Theater, narrative, impression, management is become a distinctive part of the repertoire in set of techniques to be applied against it. Who's the target? Better put, who's the target and why? The target is the citizen. Because what is fundamentally under attack is the social contract between the citizen and the state. Why are they attacking theaters, stadiums, trains, bars, etc.? Because these are spaces that have been created as a result of the social contract of the 20th and 21st century. Travel industry. Why is travel industry being tackled? Because freedom of movement, connectivity is the essence of global collaboration and cooperation. But each of these is not an end in itself. The news that is made is the objective. So the display of savagery is unbelievable. You know, our children, unborn children, were slaughtered. Our old men and women were slaughtered, and our children. The extent of violence is for the sake of violence. So this cult of violence, again, needs to be understood vis-a-vis its former. But it's highly symbolic, and you can understand that it produces fear. And fear is what it has produced. I give you an example from New York of 77. When I was going to school, I had a choice between Harvard, Cornell, and Columbia, and I liked Columbia, and people thought I was totally mad. because New York of that time was totally unsafe. But you needed to know every street. For instance, on 103rd Street in Broadway, if you turned left, you're safe. If you turned right, you could be mugged. This ecology needs to be understood when its phases, because it is distinctive. The pathology is directed towards producing fear, and fear is what they've produced. The other element is a morphology. Our systems of social analysis has trained us to look for static structural phenomena. I studied with students of Brodel. It was great wave. I spent a lot of my time on history. But the great thing was, Mediterranean, not film. It was, events were fraught on the long waves of history. Conjuncture never got articulated. The word was structure. We are trained with thinking stability. Here, we need to be able to change, to understand rapid change. Terrorist organizations change very, very rapidly. They do not remain static. Their objective remain constant, but their forms and their variety of interrelationship change. The other distinction that is distinctive from the past, because in terms of narrative and techniques there is continuity. Previously, terrorism was essentially a product of secret societies. The greatest sociological work on secret societies still remains that of Zimmel. And I asked it very simple. He said, what's a secret society? He said, a society that is a secret. But he was a brilliant man, Weber and Durkheim understood, but Zimmel really captured this because it's fragments of modernity and others. What we have now is not secret societies, but face-to-faceless or face-to-Facebook communities. Previously, for a secret society to work, you needed face-to-face relationship. Look at the great literature of the subalterns on Thuggy in India. Thugs were a secret society. They were immensely connected with a set of rituals, but they had understandings. Enormous network sets of relationship. What the current fifth wave poses to us is a completely different understanding of networks. Networks are no longer face-to-face. Networks are nodal, but they are mediated through the internet. They are mediated through the discourse and through simultaneity of action. But in terms of effect, they have far more impact than if they were face-to-face. And the reason is discovery becomes much more difficult, much more challenging to be able to deal with this. What's the enabling environments, look? I've mentioned criminality. I've mentioned the nature of formation, the ecologies. But what remains also very critical is that we do not have agreed rules of the game between states, particularly in this region of the world. South Asia has the misfortune of living in a pre-Westphalian system. We are not bound by networks of rights and obligations between states of the region. What's the Westphalian system? States consider each other credible actors and partners. They do not behave like malign non-state actors vis-a-vis their neighbors. They see a collective security to be the objective, and that's what brings stability. Stability does not come from the barrel of the gun. Stability comes from accepting agreed rules of the game and adhering on that basis. This institute functions because there are agreed rules. Functions are defined, core capabilities are defined, but this system is stateless. And what do we see as a result of this? First, there's a distinction between good and bad terrorists. Good terrorists are those that tackle your neighbors. Bad terrorists are the ones that challenge you. Good terrorists can be exported, bad terrorists need to be killed. But this type of approach is enormously short-sighted. Because those who think that they can manipulate this phenomena or this ecology or affect its pathology and morphology are mistaken. The blowback phenomena is the very real threat. Terrorism will bite, proverbially, like the snake, the person that is fitted. Second is sanctuary intolerance. Third is tolerance of a discourse of violence and hatred. When open recruitment can take place, when posses can be formed, when groups can be understood, etc. This makes it that you do not adhere to the same rules of the game, but the most significant thing is states need to have common perspective. If you look into the previous waves, effective states became the key means of containing it. National liberations led to formations of nations because it was an unequal relationship. But the others that were internal would fundamentally resulted in change of country. And let's not forget, one of the greatest sponsors of violence, political violence, prior to World War II was Serbia. And what did it wrought on the world? Because we are having this set of interrelationship between criminality, formations of distinctive networks, a distinctive embrace of violence for the sake of violence, and particularly the cult of the suicide bomb, invented in Sri Lanka, spread into a global phenomenon. Then the consequences of this. So let me now turn to saying, if I'm correct on the diagnosis, then what do we need? What do we draw from this? First, the phenomena is a medium-term challenge. It's not a short-term challenge. Australian Defence Doctrine is the only one that I've seen that acknowledges terrorism as a 20-year problem. We need to understand that we are not dealing with a 1-year phenomenon, with a 2-year phenomenon. It's not a passing threat. I hope to God I'm wrong. I pray that I'm wrong. But my analytic side tells me opposite. Second, the nature of our response is to correspondingly change to meet a medium-term phenomenon. This cannot be done short-term. We need to gear the way we've geared for other types of global challenges to meet. 3, information sharing and understanding is going to require fundamental transformation. You require reading of patterns to understand it. Old-style intelligence penetrating a secret society and discovering it and blowing it up is necessary, but it's not sufficient. First recruits to Daesh in Afghanistan were made via internet through Australia. We need to understand the range of connectivity. Third, one country response is totally insufficient. Of course, you need a national approach because states are organized on the basis of nations. But it cannot be one. This is not socialism in one country. It cannot be continued because it needs. Fourth, you need state-level corporations. We need systems of cooperation to be able to bring the coherence, the energy, the resources to bear on it. Fifth, it needs public understanding. Because the fundamental thing is to alienate the public against the democratic process. As two countries that deeply share democratic values, we need to be able to understand democratic processes. They want nothing better for me to impose emergency. But that would be their success. How do we maintain the rich democratic dialogue, the discourses that enable us to form networks of value, rights and obligation without this? And sixthly, we need to revitalize international organization, regional cooperation. Action now is required at four levels minimally. First is the global level. In Afghanistan, we are really very pleased with the global level of support. I particularly want to thank President Obama, Chancellor Merkel, Prime Minister Cameron, Prime Minister Brinsley, and others. In the 16th year of the struggle in Warsaw, they came with a ringing endorsement and have been able to understand the significance of what is at stake in Afghanistan and partner with us. In Munich, in the Munich Security Conference that Ambassador Prasad referred to, there was a feeling of gloom and doom. They were saying nothing works, this, that, and the other. And I stood up and I said, I find NATO to be functional, and I find the will for tackling this problem. We are creating the global platform for tackling terrorism. Now what is important is not just use of force, but shared perspective so that we can share this. What has changed since the Munich conference when I spoke? The social contract in Europe has come under direct attack. When you observe a phenomena, you speak one way. When you've suffered from it, you speak another way. I just want to illustrate this. We have a brilliant young Afghan man who won a Pulitzer Prize for a heinous terrorist attack on a shrine very close to the presidential palace. And he spoke about it very objectively. But he is attending the American University of Afghanistan, where he witnessed the attack on the university. And 2 days ago, his level of emotion was raw. We need to understand both the rawness of the emotion, because I go to one of my frequent sites of visits is the military hospital. I've held more maimed bodies of children than a person needs for a lifetime. But in the face of those maimed bodies, the answer is not to break down, but the resolve to overcome this phenomenon. It cannot be permitted to win. So at the global level, we have the partnership. The second thing is a tiny minority cannot be allowed to hijack a civilization and a religion. As I brought to your attention, there is not terrorism in the past 160 years. It's had adherents, practitioners from every civilization, everything. So there's no reason to demonize a certain civilization, but on the other hand, members of that community have an obligation to speak truth to violence. It is unacceptable to speak in the name of Islam. Islam does not allow for terrorism. Terrorism must be condemned, and we must stand together to contain it. Extremism cannot be permitted a platform. This is denial of everything that we stand for and everything that the civilization is stood for. Third is regional. Our greatest weakness in this part of the world is regional collaboration. Today, right now, there are two wars going on. The war in my country. First issue, this war is not a civil war. It's a wrong characterization. When you have 9 internationally classified terrorist groups operating in your country, what is the political framework for dealing with it? You know, the entire literature of counterinsurgency is premised that it's a struggle for power. That people are the water within which the fish swim. Mao Zedong's famous words. But what do we do with people who belong to other countries whose quarrels were with other countries? There is no political framework for dealing with these people. We need regional common understanding in order to defeat this. But the second war that is going on is the war in Pakistan, that the media does not speak about. There are 207,000 members of the Pakistani army just in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and of course in Balochistan. This violence needs coverage. It needs understanding. And we need to understand why a force of 207,000, which after 1898 is the greatest force assembled, is required. And again, my humble suggestion is use of force alone is not going to do it. It requires regional common understanding to be able to understand the phenomena and to deal with the networks. And the enemy of my enemy is my friend doesn't work at this regard. The fourth level is at the national level. Because each country must gear itself to be able to. But this cannot be, Mr. Ambassador, one country at a time. If we don't stand together in systems of cooperation and understand that the modern nation state is not the nation state of 18th century, we will not be able to contain this phenomenon. I've spoken about the states, but civil society and businesses have an equally significant part in this. Civil society, because civil society is the space of civic discourse. It's the space of citizenship. It's the space of voluntary association. It's the space of dialogue and understanding. Because terrorism, I think, was framed in a certain way in the past, to a very large extent, I hope I'm wrong, civil societies remained away from this discussion. We need civil society to join in earnest to be able to create the common platform in the resolve. Without civil society, the citizenship resolve can come into question. And lastly, it is business. As you kindly mentioned, I come from a country where 39% of the people live on below $1.35. 70% of the country, people live below $2 a day. What does that mean? It means that there's a small group, the upper class of a village, eats 3 meals a day. The middle class of the village eats 2 meals a day. The lower class of the village eats 1 meal a day. The excluded population does not know when their next meal comes. We have to create jobs. We have to be able to deal with this type of poverty, because this type of poverty, acceptance of this type of poverty, giving way to this type of poverty is criminal. We need to have the resolve to turn our discourse of equality, which the discourse of democratic rights and obligations into practices. And this cannot come without market building institutions. You mentioned kindly the book that I wrote on state building, and it's hard enough, particularly given legacies. But our weakest part, Mr. Ambassador, today is failure of market institutions. Weak market institutions are as much a threat in the struggle as weak state institutions, because we have to create. Where I conclude again, on behalf of my own people, is a tribute to our resilience. 40 years of violence would have broken any other people. I'm extraordinarily proud to stand in front of you to speak on behalf of a people whose will is not broken, whose spirit is not broken, whose trust in the future is not broken. And I'm delighted today with the announcement that His Excellency Prime Minister of India has made, that India will contribute $1 billion for the development of our country, again, targeted on the poorest segments and on changing their lives. Minister Nadri tweeted that the Indian Prime Minister had before said that 1.2 billion Indian people stand behind Afghanistan. Now it's translated to roughly $1 in Indian. Thank you.